books, stories, media, all of that transmits value, and culture is surrounds us. So I think when we engage a bit deeper in culturally sensitive and focused, diverse and equitable stories, we're able to, for our, especially for youth of color, but all youth, for them to open their horizons to what is possible, how they feel about themselves, especially developing confidence and self-esteem and giving them vision, and opening their imaginations to what is possible. I think all of that is rooted in cultural literacy. Of course, building strong readers and a love for reading is so important. But I think from the cultural standpoint, it is the gateway. It's the bridge for us to, as a society, for us to be more loving and kind and developing social and emotional learning through our connections as people.
Welcome to the EdGap Evolution Podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Phillips. You can call me Mariah because that's my name, and I'm thrilled to have you on this journey with me and all of the spectacular guests who jump on the podcast to give you more options for educating children so that children have more options for building a magnificent future. The EdGap Evolution Podcast is a digital community where parents, educators, and innovators drop the details on how they are using their lives to help children explore the vastness of education beyond the textbook so that we can close America's education gap together. And just in case you didn't get the memo, producing a podcast is a whole lot of work. We're talking schedule coordination, production, the list goes on and on. So in return for bringing you this show every week, we just ask that you always find a way to share and use what you learn on the podcast to enrich children and families everywhere. Alrighty, without further ado, come along with me to meet our very next guest. Today we're speaking with Marjuan Canady. She is an award-winning Caribbean American artist, entrepreneur, educator, and literacy advocate. A native Washingtonian, Marjuan's work spans theater, film, television, children's media, and literature. She has 15 years of arts education experience, instructing youth from preschool to college levels, and her original work has been seen at the John F. Kennedy Center, Sesame Street, the Smithsonian, and the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute, to name a few. Look, we could spend hours listing out the many wonderful things that Marjuan is doing to engage youth of color in creative arts, but we're even more fortunate to have her here with us today so she can fill you in on the magic happening over at her youth-focused 501c3 organization called the Canady Foundation for the Arts and much, much more. So Marjuan, thank you for being here with us and joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. That's what we love to hear. Okay, so before we jump into your history and your work with youth, we want to know more about your passion for the arts. I personally think the arts is so exciting, and I just have such an admiration for folks who are deeply engrossed in the world. But what I find really interesting about actors and great performers in general is you all's ability to take on new personalities, in the most sane way possible, and to get into the character or the story at hand. You really take on a new reality. So we're wondering, why do you choose theater? And what about performing has compelled you to stick with it for so long? I don't know how many years it is, but if you could fill us in on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think theater and the arts chose me. I'll say that. I've been studying theater and just engrossed in the arts and dance, music since I was a child. And from what I always remembered, I always saw. I always saw myself in the arts. I didn't necessarily think I could be a professional artist. I didn't know what that meant as a child. I didn't grow up with any artists in my family. Everyone's in the sciences or in education. But I think that I was able to, connect with, you know, discovering who I was as a young person. And I felt so free, so free in my imagination and make believe. And it really just connected me, throughout my whole life. Just it kept connecting me to the next step. And I'm still experiencing that as an adult. I'm still, the arts and theater and film is allowing me to move to next levels. In my professional career, but definitely as a young person, theater, gave me so much freedom. It brought me out of my shell. I was a very shy child. And I was able to, kind of escape to new worlds. And funny enough, I didn't actually enjoy reading a lot when I was a
Really?
child. But being exposed to theater definitely exposed me to plays,
Mm,
which in turn got me more interested in reading. And I
okay.
think, yeah, for a lot of children of color, which I'm sure we will talk about more, just the struggle of finding books that are relatable to young people and young people of color especially, and really that's what drives, I think, kids to want to get into books and reading and literacy and the arts overall, just stories that they can connect with, where they can see themselves. So I'd really say that theater chose me. And it really, every morning I wake up, ready to go, living in my passion. So I'm very thankful that I'm able to do my craft every day.
Yes, and when you said, well, you said it quite a few times now. Theater chose me. I like perked up because we had another professional artist on here. She also has an organization. She was on the show, and she said that ceramics chose her, like her art chose her. And until you all said that, I never thought about it that way. Like I always thought about it as, the person is choosing the thing. But I guess it does make sense that when something's for you, and just as you can choose something that exists, such as theater or any art form or anything, can choose you as well. So
Absolutely. I hear a lot of musicians say that, when people always ask musicians how did they play, or instrumentalists, how did they find their specific instrument? Which is always interesting to me, because you wonder, like, oh, why did this person start playing the drums, or
right.
the saxophone or the piano? And most musicians say it's because the instrument chose them.
Wow. So you also said that you got into reading because you didn't really enjoy reading that much in school at first, but then plays like really sparked your interest in reading. And I really like the fact that you mentioned that because I just so happened to have a mother who was an English teacher, so it was kind of like by default. But in
Okay.
school, I mean, my sister and I talk about it all the time. Even the older we got, we were like, "Oh my goodness, none of these books are boring." Like some of
Right.
them were boring, some of them we just couldn't relate to. Were if for people who don't know, I'm black, and I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, which is predominantly black city and county, and there just wasn't much literature out there that really like just woke us up. So I appreciate the fact that you brought up the fact that plays were something that you could latch onto that really like sparked that love for reading in you.
Oh yeah. I mean, I definitely, I still connect with that. I mean, I think, even as an adult, we experience stories, especially now in quarantine, movies and any type of media that we can relate to. So it definitely is the same for children, if not more, that, you are engaged. You're so much more engaged when you are experiencing stories and books that are about you, or at least that is the initial appeal, right? That's kind of the gateway into the story. Seeing, sometimes it could be physical, seeing someone that looks like you, or an experience that you can connect with in a story that makes you want to go deeper.
Yes, I'm wondering, um, you said that you've just always been into theater, especially when you were a kid. That's when you got started. But can you recall like the very first time you performed in front of an audience? Like, what were you doing? Who was there? How did you feel?
That is so, that's a really great question. So I would say, I can honestly say an imaginary audience. So I remember putting on performances in my living room with my older brother when I was maybe about 3 years old.
Oh,
And I used to line up the audience, like all my stuffed animals. Put all my dolls. And I was very serious about this. I
this is
was
a show, dolls.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I had like 30, a good amount of stuffed animals. And, I remember it's so terrible. I used to watch it in living color as a 3 or 4 year old, and I
oh
would
my
learn.
goodness.
I know it's so terrible. It's terrible. Um, and I'm thinking about it like I would never let my daughter watch
Look, you had to see it sooner or later. So,
right, right. But I would learn the dances. So my way into theater was actually through dance. Like I love dance. So I would learn like Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson's choreography
a
and in
modern
living
day
color.
TikTok. I
Yeah,
mean, well,
yeah.
a past TikTok. TikTok's the modern day
Yeah.
living color.
And I would just, find, costumes and garments or put my mom's clothes on and, I put on a whole show
Yeah.
and then I would invite my brother or just anybody in the house, my mom to come and, they had to sit in a specific seat. I'm like, no, don't sit there. I remember all of that. So, that was more of a, in-house performance experience, but I definitely remember, doing ballet. And I remember the first time I had a ballet recital, like I had a solo, like I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and
Yeah.
I was so ready. I had like, four little steps I had to do. And then the minute I got out there, I remember I just froze and I was just looking at the audience, and I just failed at that solo. So I do remember that. That's one thing I it's really fresh in my mind.
But you know what? I'm sure you remember it to this day, and now you've been killing performances ever since. So maybe it needed to happen.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm glad there's no tape of that, even though I would appreciate that now.
Right. So, we're going to, in a minute, we're going to get into talking about just how great the work you're doing is and how great the arts can be for children and even into adulthood. But keeping it real, when some folks hear the words theater or art, their minds don't necessarily lean towards entrepreneurship or the prospect of the arts being a viable career path. But your organization, which we'll talk about in a second, connects youth to professional artists of color via mentorship and professional development. So, can you help us define what a professional artist is? Like, I'm wondering what separates a professional artist from someone who just really, really enjoys practicing art forms as a hobby?
I think for a professional artist, it's someone very simple, just someone who makes their living through their art form. I think the arts, there's so many different levels to practicing art, like you said. It could be a spiritual practice, it could be a hobby. There's so much healing that comes from the arts. I mean, I couldn't even imagine a world without music and
Yeah.
storytelling and visual arts. I mean, it's engulfed around us, that it's just part of our society. But I think when we talk about professional artists, there is that commerce piece to it. It's an entrepreneurship goes hand in hand with being a professional artist, because you really have to think of yourself as the CEO of your art.
Mm-hmm.
So with my organization, the Canady Foundation for the Arts, we want to not only provide, creative outlets and opportunities for young people to engage in the arts, but we also want them, especially our young people of color, to meet professional artists who do this work every day and are committed to their craft. So there is that mentorship aspect to understanding that art and being an artist is a viable option for a career. And actually there's so many, the job market in the creative fields is huge and it's growing. And I
Yeah, it's
think that
booming.
yeah, and I think there's so many relatable and transferable skills that, you know, young people learn from the art. So skills like leadership and individuality and creativity and discipline, all of these things that even if you're not, you know, moving in a trajectory to work in the arts, every industry, they're looking for, you know, these types of skills, these skills that, you know, you can bring to any field. And so we want to provide that foundation, as well as, you know, exposing kids to, you know, artists that do different types of work. So I know that, you know, a lot of young people, they love, you know, being exposed to social media and then what's on TV. So seeing careers, you know, being as a dancer or as an actress, like these are all careers that most young people see just in their surroundings. But what about meeting a cinematographer
Hmm.
or a graphic designer or a choreographer, or those careers, or, you know, even a lighting designer,
Yes.
those careers that are part of are a lot of times not highlighted in our community, not necessarily because they're not valuable, but just because we don't know those people. We
Right.
don't know who those people are. So, you know, for me being a professional artist, I engage with these type of people all the time. In my work, from, you know, working on film sets and working in theater, both, you know, the nonprofit and the commercial sectors. So I meet so many different types of people and I just am amazed. And I think about when I was a child, you know, I never got to meet a director, a film director,
Yeah.
or a producer. I didn't know what these roles were. So, you know, I went more the traditional route of learning about performance. But as I got older, I thought I became more exposed to, you know, those storytellers and the creators, the people that are creating the work. And obviously there's nothing wrong with being a performer, but I think as Black and brown people, you know, we have to understand that, you know, we are in control of our stories. We have to tell our stories. We
Hmm.
have to and we have to be the ones that, you know, keep our history. And the way we do that is being the creator. So, you know, through my nonprofit, that's our goal is, you know, not only to expose kids, but also empower them that, you know, they can tell their own stories, that they are entrepreneurs in themselves. And, you know, I know that they're, the statistics, the data is there. I know there's a stat from 2019 from the National Endowment for the Arts, and they found that, you know, low income students who are engaged in the arts are twice as likely to graduate college, um, more so than their peers that don't have an arts education. So, you know, those skills are transferable to really impacting young people to be better citizens, to be ready for the professional field, any professional field that they want to get into. So I'm really proud of the work my nonprofit is doing to really impact our communities.
Yes, I'm excited about the work you all are doing as well. And you mentioned communities quite a bit, so we're going to flashback one more time, just one more time to your childhood,
Okay.
because I want to know where are you from, like, where are you from, and if we were to go to your hometown, what's one activity that we should absolutely make sure we experience while we're there?
Oh, wow. talking about my childhood makes me so happy because I don't get to talk about it often.
I'm kind of a big kid, so as I talk about people's childhoods way too clearly the podcast, but
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
safe here talking about childhood.
Likewise, likewise. I'm definitely a big kid. Yeah, well, I'm from Washington, D.C. originally. My mom is from Trinidad and Tobago from the Caribbean. So I have the Caribbean roots, and my dad is African American. So I grew up in a very culturally rich, community here in D.C. And, like most cities, we're dealing with gentrification and a lot of change in our community. So I remember growing up hearing go-go in the street and, even hearing like Caribbean music and just engulfed in, a really rich culture. And seeing so many entrepreneurs. I think that um, has really influenced me and allowed me to, um, create not only a a career that a lot of people look at as not a sustainable career, but coming from a community that I always saw business owners.
Yeah.
I always saw maybe not necessarily artists. I definitely was exposed to really great art and especially cultural creative experiences. But I just remember like so much love, like so much connection to my neighbors and the community that I'm from. So I would say one thing that if you come to DC, I mean, this is this is a very political city, but I think a lot of people don't get to see the real DC. And I'd say one thing that you have to experience is going down to U Street. I don't know you're from Baltimore, but U Street is it still is to a certain extent a cultural hub. It's similar to like when you go to New York, you go to Harlem, you go to 125th Street. Like over the years, it was where there was so much jazz and small businesses and great food, and there's still some spots that you can really experience the culture of DC, which for me, this is a chocolate city. So places like Ben's Chili Bowl is there, where you can experience really really good food, good food and good music.
Amen.
And there's so much like visual art, a lot of murals. And that the block has changed a lot, but I think U Street is it was considered Black Broadway. It
Yeah.
was kind of this the the block where it was a few blocks where a lot of the artists from the early 20th century, they came up from the South through that Great Migration and performed and worked and built community on U Street. People like Duke Ellington is from DC, but Duke Ellington lived and performed on U Street. Langston Hughes or Neil Hurston, so many great Black cultural pioneers were part of this tiny community of the U Street area, which is the Howard University is around that area. So definitely, I think finding little gems at on U Street is what you got to do when you come to DC.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a time that I came to DC to have a good time that at some point I didn't end up on U Street.
Yeah.
So yes,
Yeah, I
guys.
mean, there's a lot going on in DC. So, there's a lot of monuments and, all the stuff that's important, but is boring. But those cultural, and definitely I think checking out the Smithsonian African American Museum, which I think you need a month to like really experience
Yeah.
everything in there.
Yes, like you need multiple trips. I think it's so
Definitely.
cool that you mentioned Duke Ellington having been one of those great Black performers from U Street because you decided to take your love for the arts to the next level as you advanced in your education and you went to the Duke Ellington School of the Arts, correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so I'm wondering what was one of your favorite classes and why?
Yeah, so I would say, going to Ellington really changed my life as a young person. And it was high school, so looking back on it, it felt like college. But it is a high school. It's very similar if people are familiar with like Baltimore School of the Arts or LaGuardia School of the
Okay, got
Arts
it.
in New York. Um, Everyone always asks, were you guys dancing on tables? Was it like fame? Not at all. But the exciting thing about Ellington, and I think the that made it very unique, was that not only were we studying, arts, high quality, intensive arts, getting high quality, intensive arts training. Our day was kind of split up from 8 in the morning until 1. We were taking academic classes, and then from about 1 until about 4, about 5 o'clock, we were taking arts classes, and then we had rehearsals and anything that we were doing in terms of production from 5 p.m. until about 10 o'clock at night. And that was every day for 4 years. So it did not feel like this was a hobby. It did not feel like it was, obviously it was fun, but it gave me and so many of my peers like so much purpose.
Yeah.
um some of my best friends still to this day are from high school. Actually, my companies that I built, it was they were with my high school friends. And it just gave, I'm thinking about some of our graduates. Our graduates are on Broadway, they're in Hollywood, they're Grammy award winning artists.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I think one of our most famous alum is Dave Chappelle. So it really provided a foundation, not just in the arts, but also connecting us, which I've mentioned a lot, just to our community, to connecting us as activists too. That
Yeah.
art can is a tool for social change, which I think in terms of curriculum is very different from a lot of other art schools. But Ellington, in the spirit of Duke Ellington, the school uses our arts training and curriculum to teach kids and young people about activism and how you can use art for social change. So I remember a lot of the work that I was engaged in. They were traditional plays and whatnot, but also we were writing our own work. We were creating work in reaction to things that were happening. I remember the sniper shooting that happened. I think maybe I was a sophomore. We created
Oh
a
yeah,
piece
how could you
around that.
forget? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we were doing a lot of street theater, a lot of things around like police brutality and poverty and things that were happening in our city. And as a young person, it made art mean so much more because it was a release, it was a healing tool. And that's what I try to do and give that to young people today, because you know the arts changed my life, and I don't know what I would be doing if I didn't go to Ellington and have that experience. So yeah, our Ellington family is so deep. It might be my education experience. I later I went on to New York to study theater, both on the undergrad and graduate level. But Ellington just had such a huge impact in my life, and built some of the most important relationships I
That's so
still have to
beautiful.
today.
That's wonderful. Clearly, they value excellence there, and that's what comes from Ellington. So,
Oh,
that's
yes.
awesome. And, I mean, now that we've heard that you have been dedicated to the arts and to just doing it, just doing it and being active and learning and growing. That level of excellence and dedication to the arts and enriching folks definitely is prevalent in your nonprofit organization that you started in 2015, correct?
Yes.
The Canady Foundation for the Arts. So, could you tell us your mission at the foundation? We'd love to hear, what you guys are, what you're there doing. What's the spirit behind it?
We're a nonprofit that uses the power of story and storytelling to connect young people of color from ages 2, little tiny babies, all the way to 18, through professional artists, through mentorship, live theater, arts education workshops, and we're really using, like I said, story to be the impact, and allowing young people to see themselves, to create their own stories, from all different levels, right? So for young people, starting off, which is probably the most important age, in the pre-K level, being able to see professional artists who look like them engaged in play and make believe and culture. So our mission, really is to use cultural arts workshops, fellowships, our entrepreneurial development to empower youth of color, to be actual change agents within their own communities. So, you know, like I said, I remember at all different stages of my life, um, story and art. And, obviously I can't remember so much. When we all can't remember a lot when we were small, but the things that I do remember are all engaged in the arts, or are
Hmm.
centered around the arts. So for me, it's so important. Our programming caters a lot to early childhood and exposing young people at risk, especially low income youth, youth of color, to art that is meaningful and authentic and culturally relevant to their experiences.
Yeah, very important and also very cool. And for those of us who, there may be some folks listening who are like, okay, well, Marjorie, you keep saying, for youth to be able to tell their stories, for children to tell their stories, what might, like in real life, in reality, what does that look like for, or what type of experience might, I know that's a wide hypothetical, but might a child draw from to tell a story? There's just so much that happens in life, and maybe like condense for us what does it look like for someone to extract a piece of their life and say, hey, I'm going to make this into some type of story.
I'm a relatively new mom. I have an almost 2-year-old. So I'm always engaging with her around her own experiences and her own story, even now. So I think, reading aloud, especially, allowing your child to experience what story looks like to them, is so important. So having conversations, especially, when they're in the toddler phase, is so important to get them going so they can understand and engage in language. Reading, especially reading aloud, is so important. So I do have a really great statistic from this organization, Capstone, that looks at the importance of reading aloud to your child. And this is from a 2020 study. They found that 85% of children who are read aloud with their parents or a guardian, that 92% of parents and children identify that as a special time, and that 73% of those parents reported that reading aloud to their child before their first birthday engage them so much deeper in understanding language and comprehension, reading comprehension, and their vocabulary. So little things like that is so helpful and important. So, we do read alouds in the classroom. With our partner organizations and schools, and we have professional actors of color come in and engage in these read alouds and storytelling and allow the young people, again, they're 3 or 4 years old, to come up and, take out and extract parts of the story that they identify with and allow them to build on it themselves. And what that might look like is, depending on the age range, it could be an expression through visual arts. So taking out a theme from a story that is read and expanding into how they identify with a specific character or a specific theme or color. That could be expressed through the visual arts, or it could be expressed through performance, through movement, through music. So I think, again, it ranges for the age range, but it's a similar concept, for middle school students or high school students, that you can provide a foundational story or a theatrical experience for a young person, and then they can find moments, specific moments that they can relate to, and then through a arts activity curriculum, we're able to allow them to create their own story, to empower, themselves, that, hey, I think that a lot of times young people we have to engage them so they understand that someone wrote this particular story that they're engaging with. And there's so many different types of stories that there's not just one single story. So I think, reading aloud and literacy is just a huge component of what we do. And like I said, I didn't like reading that much as a child, but once I start to read books and engage in plays and musicals that were more about my experience, it really opened up my world. So I see that through the work that we've been doing for the past 7 years. I can't believe it's been 7 years already.
That's so amazing. And not only do you do work in the classroom, but you've written an entire children's book series called Callaloo Kids. And your work puts a huge emphasis on cultural literacy. I know we're talking about literacy now, but I really appreciate your emphasis on cultural literacy. And so I would love for you to tell us, why is it important to prioritize cultural literacy versus literacy plain and simple? Like, those listening might understand what we're talking about, but some people might be like, okay, isn't any type of literacy education geared towards kids just as relevant as the next? Like, why is the emphasis on culture so important?
Books, stories, media, all of that transmits value. And culture is surrounds us. So I think when we engage a bit deeper in culturally sensitive and focused, diverse and equitable stories, we're able to, especially for youth of color, but all youth, for them to open their horizons to what is possible, how they feel about themselves, especially developing confidence and self-esteem, and giving them vision, and opening their imaginations to what is possible. I think all of that is rooted in cultural literacy. Of course, building strong readers and a love for reading is so important. But I think from the cultural standpoint, it is the gateway. It's the bridge for us to, as a society, for us to be more loving and kind, and developing social and emotional learning through our connections as people. So that cultural element is so important, and for many young people, the only way that they can learn about someone that is different from them, or someone that they don't see often in their community, and that's for all children, is through books, is through stories, is through music and the arts. So, someone that, lives out, on the other side of the country or the world, we can learn about Indian culture or Asian culture, African culture through our stories, and the importance of, engaging in stories that are authentic. So when I say authentic, meaning, reading books and engaging in stories and theater that is written by people of color, that is created by people of color.
Yeah, so
um
important.
and it is, and I know that the children's, I want to make sure that yeah, it's the Cooperative Children's Book Center. They do studies, every year or so, or every couple of years, on children's books that are written by authors of color. And in 2020, they found like 26% of children's books were written by people of color, which has gone up by about 2% in 5 years,
Wow.
which, is still very low. So, for me as a writer, and a creative entrepreneur and educator, that kind of was my mission, really,
Yeah.
with creating my book series, Callaloo Kids. One, to celebrate and identify my own cultural makeup, being first generation, being Caribbean and African American. I wanted to use my books to celebrate African diaspora culture and be able to um, engage with children, not only of, my own Caribbean or African American descent, but for all children to celebrate and to acknowledge that we come from a rich and unique and complex and um, history, and that our culture is always changing. So, I mean, I think that's the fun part about culture, that everyone has a culture. So we all kind of come to the meeting ground, with our own culture. Everybody can share in their culture. But I think it's especially important in the climate that we're living in, that we engage so much more deeply, because our young people are seeing, what's happening on the street and what's happening in Black and Brown communities. And there is a much more, I would say there's a bigger urgency um, to engage with this type of work now than ever, because our young people are watching what our adults are doing.
Yeah.
So, my Callaloo books provides that. Actually started writing Callaloo in 2014 as a theatrical play, and it has morphed into a book series with actually 5 books in our collection, but each book celebrates a specific um, country, culture, folklore from the islands. Our first book is about Trinidadian folklore. Our second book is about Puerto Rican folklore, and our third book it celebrates the Gullahs, Southern African American folklore. So it connects, our history, storytelling, folklore, but through food traditions, which I think everybody can relate to. How food is passed down, our importance of ancestry, um, of our own folkloric storytelling traditions, and again, engaging with first and second generation youth and how they understand their history and family tradition. So I'm so proud of what we've done with Callaloo, and we've been able to not only create these books that are completely independent. Like I said, a lot of my team is from high school. My high school friends who are all professional artists, we've been able to create these books, but also perform them on stages and adapt them into digital media so it can be these stories can reach a much larger audience. So um, our books are available everywhere. We have great curriculum that coincides with the book, so teachers can use the stories as a tool in the classroom.
That's great. I should have asked you this earlier. What is Callaloo? Like, I know that it's a food, but like, I don't know too much of, is there a reason why you chose to use this particular word as the stamp or the foundation for not just the book, but a couple of the programs that you offer to schools?
Yeah, yeah. Well, callaloo is a stew. It's a spinach like stew that's eaten throughout the Caribbean, but it has derivatives throughout the entire African diaspora. So for Americans in the U.S., we know it more as like gumbo. If you know about Southern food or New Orleans, especially gumbo is very similar to the texture of callaloo. Or collard greens, like when you cook collard greens down. So it's a green. In Puerto Rico, they call it asopao, and it was such a symbolic food for me that connected Black culture and experiences, Black and Brown experiences. Um, it's symbolic, especially for Trinidadians. Callaloo is actually the main dish of Trinidad, and I grew up eating callaloo. I remember my grandmother would make callaloo. She would tell me stories about growing up in Trinidad, my mom being there with my aunt. So, callaloo was kind of the the food that connected, so many generations in my own family. But it also, Trinidadians, we consider ourselves to be a callaloo people, and that being said, that callaloo is a mix up of a lot of different things. So
Okay.
it really is, whoever is making the callaloo is what makes it unique. So,
Ooh, okay.
spinach is kind of like the foundation, but you can add whatever you want to it. Your spices, you could add shrimp to it. You could add,
Hey,
any type
shrimp.
of meat, crab. You could add anything you want. And I think that's the exciting thing that when I'm performing or reading my books, we have a little fun activity for the kids to make their own imaginary callaloo. And that, callaloo can take you anywhere you want to go. So that was kind of the reason why I chose that title, and it has a nice ring to it, I should say.
I mean, look, it has a nice ring to it, and I'm hungry now. It is early in the morning. Woo!
Me
And I need me
too.
some
Me
callaloo
too.
now. But before we wrap up, I just want to know, and folks can, we'll lead you all to the website so that you can check out all the programs and thoroughly. But I just want to know, is there a program that schools and organizations rave over? Like, is there a most popular program that you want to tell us about right now through your organization?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we offer a lot of different programs. Just of course, we have like individual workshops that range from, theater, yoga, dance, movement therapy, poetry. So just individualized classes, but we also have more curated cultural experiences. So two programs that are very popular is our Callaloo in the Classroom uh, program, which is a arts and cultural educational experience through live performance. So it's an assembly style performance that includes our puppets, which they're very lifelike puppets, similar to like on Sesame Street. So it engages with this adaptation of our first children's book, Callaloo, a Jazz Folktale, as a performance, along with an interactive arts workshop that follows that. So we've been doing that program for about 5 years now. So we've been to we've we've touched the lives of about 4,000 youth through that program.
Hey, that's
Working
great.
with working with DC public schools, KIPP charter schools, Baltimore public schools, as well as a lot of organizations and public schools in New York, the New York, New Jersey area. So that is a popular program. And then one of our newer programs is our program Kitty Carnival, which is an interactive workshop that exposes children, mostly pre-K to about first grade, to the elements and origins of Caribbean carnival and storytelling. So we do mask making, movement, soca, dance, and then young people even learn about the steel pan, the traditions of steel pan music, and African drumming. So that we've been doing that program for about 3 years now, and we've been to the Caribbean Cultural Center. Again, KIPP is one of our big partners, KIPP DC, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun to
It
see
sounds
the
like a good
kids.
time. Can I
Yeah,
be
I
a
remember.
kid?
I know, like even the teachers are, really engaged, and they're
Yeah.
experiencing carnival in the classroom too. So, and I think through these programs, we really emphasize that cultural aspect, because the culture is the thing that we practice every day, but a lot of times we don't acknowledge it, we don't celebrate it. And for our Black and Brown children, culture is the thing that ignites them and wakes them up and
Yeah.
gets them connected to what they're doing. So it's very immersive, it's very interactive, and we want our young people to be part of the storytelling. So there's always an aspect to our programs that get kids involved. We don't want to be the only ones telling the story. We
All
want
right.
the young people doing most of the work.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And they'll be the ones growing up, taking over for us someday. So they have to be connected to their culture. And I want to zoom out a bit and ask you, Marjuan, what is the world taking too long to realize about the way that we educate children? And how are you helping to change that?
Yeah, I think that, something that the world is taking a long time to figure out, when it comes to education, is just, I think we know the importance of arts, but I think it's really about funding it and supporting it, and the importance of diversity and equity in our education system, especially when it comes to curriculum. I think that so much of our history and our educational foundation is rooted in eurocentric understanding of knowledge,
Hmm.
and that needs to be dismantled,
Yeah.
right? And the way that um, young people learn, there's so many different ways for them to learn, through auditory, visual, and physical learning methodologies. That's why the arts are important, because through specifically my organization, kids are learning through dance, they're learning through music, through engaging in stories and language that is meaningful to them. So I think that is something that, I think there is a lot of work happening in that area, but it's so relevant and apparent to me because of the need for our programming. We get so many requests from teachers, educators, administrators to bring our programs to their schools, because they're still stuck in this traditional method that is not working.
Yeah.
We're learning about, you know, Christopher Columbus and him finding the Western world, when that is just not accurate.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
That is not our history. And so I think we have to work to dismantle that and find alternative ways to educate not just Black and Brown children, but all children, because we all young people have to come from a space where we're all on the same playing field. And I think that's what equity really looks like. We talk about diversity, but I think the root of it is we have to create equitable systems where everyone shows up on the same playing field.
Yes, that is absolutely the key. Thank you for so thoroughly explaining that to us. And thank you for joining us today. I mean, the wisdom that you've poured out, to hear the work that you're doing, to hear the way that you're helping children, especially Black and Brown children, connect to themselves and their culture is just, there are truly no words, but I'm glad we were able to find them through this interview. Find some through this
Thank
interview.
you.
And so we want to know what's next for you, Marjuan, and for the Canady Foundation for the Arts, and what's the best way to stay in touch with you and your work? Like, what if we want to bring your program to one of our schools or our community organizations? How do we get in touch? How do we stay in touch?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of great resources on our website, the Canady Foundation Arts.org. So it's www.canadyfoundationarts.org. And we have a great blog. It's called the Artsy blog that one of our educators, our certified educators, Wendy Toribio, who is an educator actually in Dominican Republic, she creates blog posts for us bi-weekly that are culturally rooted. And she provides curriculum, tips, resources, especially we're coming out of quarantine, but a lot of homeschooling that you can do with your child or activities. So that's a great resource. We also have our programs. We have a lot of virtual digital programs. So we just wrapped up our Young, Gifted, and Woke series that was hosted by a 14-year-old social entrepreneur, Chloe Thompson, who works around homelessness in Los Angeles. So that program is online on our YouTube channel. You can be connected through our website. And then any of our programs that you're interested in, you can go online, take a look at them, request them, or request more information through our website. And then we have, lastly, a really great resource, a free resource for educators and parents who work especially with young people of color. We have a literacy guide, the ABCs of cultural literacy, and it's an anti-racism guide that can, begin the conversations and continue the conversation around racism in our society through storytelling and books for both adults and young people. So you can download that on our website. And we have a short link that I could share with you as well. You can put in your show notes, but it's just www.tinyurl.com/CFA literacy guide. So you can just download that and it could be a great resource for you guys. We have a lot of great programming coming up next year, both in person and then virtual programs. We have our CFA Repertory Theater, which is a African diaspora performance theater group that is connected through the nonprofit. So we have some great performances. And for me personally, I actually just got a prestigious fellowship in New York with the Front Row Productions organization, which really trains.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's connected to Columbia University, their MFA theater producing program. And I was selected to be in this program. And the program really trains emerging Black theater producers on how to produce in the commercial world.
Whoa.
And bring my production actually to Broadway. So I will be kind of moving back and forth between New York and DC to begin the long process of bringing my theater production to the Broadway stages, as well as studying at Columbia and in London, actually. So I'll be moving around quite a bit in the next year. But I'm on social media at Marjuan Canady and my nonprofit at Canady Foundation Arts. So you can kind of stay in touch. That was a very long answer, but we
Hey,
have
we
a
want to hear all of it. And like, guys, I really don't know what more you need to hear. This is just, I mean, first off, as we wrap up, why wouldn't you want your child in your community to be a part of something with a person like Marjuan, who clearly is just dedicated to the arts? She's still growing, she's doing such great things. And it's really, you can see it is clear if you go to the website and all the programs that are happening and everything that's being produced. These are the sorts of things that your children, especially Black and Brown children, need to be a part of. Please don't let these resources go to waste. We know that the school year is coming. We know, especially right now during COVID, it's easing up, but we still have all these variants and things are just so unpredictable. So make sure that you are getting a hold of these resources and at-home curriculums and getting your child in these programs and doing our due diligence as adults and communities who are, we're the ones raising children of color, making sure that if your child is going to school and there's not a program like this, there's not a program or there's no evidence that your child is receiving culturally relevant education, you as parents, even aunties and uncles, administrators, what have you, have the power to bring these sorts of resources like the programs Marjuan is talking about us today. You have the power to bring it to your school, talk to the principal, go to the PTA, let your voice be heard. Because at the end of the day, parents' input is the input that is going to move the needle. You have the power and get your children and other children in our communities what they need. So Marjuan, thank you so much. We're very grateful to have had you with us today. And I hope that you have a wonderful day and congratulations on all the great things that are coming up for you and for the organization.
Thank you so much for having me, Mariah. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun also talking about my childhood.
Good. I'm glad you had fun. We'll have a wonderful day, okay?
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. So what'd you think? How will you take what you learned today on the EdGap Evolution podcast to make sure that more children and families know that they have more options for building a magnificent future? If you like what you heard and want to get notified when the next episode goes live, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll notify you when the next episode is out. Don't forget to check the show notes where I share information on today's guest, and yes, we do have a website. You can always pop in on us at www.edgapevolution.com. Again, I'm Mariah Phillips, and I leave you with this. Embrace the evolution, y'all.